Have you ever wondered why there's such a powerful tension between spirituality and sexuality in human experience? Carl Jung, one of history's most influential psychoanalysts, dedicated much of his work to exploring this fascinating duality. Unlike many thinkers of his time, Jung didn't view sexual desire as an obstacle to spiritual life, but as a vital force deeply connected to our collective unconscious. In his analyses of dreams, symbols, and ancestral myths, he discovered surprising patterns. The more a person deepens their spiritual journey, the more intensely they may experience libido energy in all its manifestations. What does this mysterious connection between the spiritual and the sexual reveal about our psyche? The answer could completely transform your understanding of human nature and the path to psychological wholeness. Many of us grow up believing that spiritual pursuits and sexual desires exist in separate worlds. We're often taught that to become more spiritual, we must somehow transcend or control our sexual impulses. But what if this common belief is fundamentally flawed? Carl Jung challenged this artificial division with a revolutionary perspective that turned traditional thinking upside down. Jung saw our sexual energy, what he called libido, as something far more profound than most people realize. For him, libido wasn't just about physical attraction or reproduction. It represented the entire life force flowing through us, a powerful creative energy that shapes not only our sexual desires, but also our spiritual yearnings. This was a dramatic departure from Freud's more limited view of libido as primarily sexual in nature. Think about those moments when you felt truly alive, perhaps during intense creative work, deep meditation, or yes, during intimate connection. Jung would say these are all manifestations of the same fundamental energy. The electricity that pulses through your body during sexual arousal shares its source with the expansive feeling of awe you might experience watching a sunset or during profound spiritual insight. What makes Jung's vision so revolutionary is his insistence that spiritual growth doesn't come from suppressing this energy, but from understanding and integrating it. Many spiritual traditions throughout history have treated sexual desire as something to be overcome, controlled, or channeled away from its natural expression. Jung saw this approach as psychologically damaging and ultimately futile. Instead, he proposed that our conscious mind and our unconscious sexual drives need to be brought into harmony. When we reject or repress our sexual nature in the name of spirituality, those energies don't simply disappear. They become more powerful in the shadows of our unconscious, often manifesting as obsessive thoughts, dreams, or psychological disturbances. The more we try to escape this fundamental aspect of ourselves, the more it demands our attention. This helps explain why spiritually inclined people often experience such intense sexual feelings. The energy they're cultivating through spiritual practice isn't separate from sexual energy. It's the same force being expressed through different channels. As someone becomes more attuned to deeper levels of consciousness, they naturally become more sensitive to all forms of this primal energy, including its sexual expressions. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. Many of his patients were people who had devoted themselves to spiritual or intellectual pursuits while neglecting their sexual nature. The result wasn't elevated spirituality, but psychological imbalance. True psychological health, Jung insisted, comes not from transcending our sexual nature, but from embracing it as an integral part of who we are. This doesn't mean surrendering to every sexual impulse. Rather, it means acknowledging these impulses as meaningful expressions of our deeper nature that deserve understanding, not shame or rejection. When we approach our sexuality with conscious awareness, it becomes not an obstacle to spiritual growth, but a powerful ally in the journey toward wholeness. Jung's approach offers liberation from the painful inner conflict many spiritually minded people experience. Instead of fighting an exhausting battle against their own desires, they can recognize these impulses as valuable messages from the unconscious, signals pointing toward aspects of themselves that seek integration into their conscious identity. Think of it as a river of energy flowing through your being. You can try to dam it up, but eventually the pressure will become too great. You can try to divert it entirely into acceptable channels, but it will find ways to express itself regardless. Or you can learn to work with this flow, honoring its power while consciously guiding its expression in ways that support your growth and well-being. This revolutionary perspective explains why spiritual awakening often coincides with sexual awakening. As we become more consciously aware of the deeper currents of energy within us, we naturally become more sensitive to all its manifestations. The heightened sexual feelings that spiritual people often experience aren't a sign of failure or distraction. They're a natural consequence of becoming more alive to the full spectrum of human experience. By understanding this connection between spiritual and sexual energy, we can move beyond the guilt and confusion that often accompany spiritual development. We can embrace our full humanity, recognizing that the path to wholeness includes integration of all aspects of ourselves, including our sexual nature. This is the first step toward the psychological transformation that Jung called individuation. The process of becoming fully ourselves, with all our inner contradictions reconciled and integrated. When we begin to accept the powerful connection between our spiritual and sexual energies, we encounter one of Jung's most profound concepts, the shadow. This isn't just any psychological idea. It's the key to understanding why spiritual people often feel sexual desires with such intensity, and why fighting these feelings typically backfires. The shadow contains everything we've learned to hide, deny, or reject about ourselves. For many spiritually inclined people, sexual desires, especially unconventional ones, get pushed into this shadow realm. We might tell ourselves spiritual people shouldn't feel this way, or these desires aren't compatible with my spiritual path. Yet Jung discovered something remarkable. The more we push something into shadow, the more power it gains over us. Individuation, Jung's term for the journey toward psychological wholeness, requires us to face our shadow honestly. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse, but it does mean acknowledging that these desires are part of us. When spiritual seekers deny their sexual nature, they unknowingly create an energetic split within themselves. The rejected sexual energy doesn't disappear. It grows stronger in the unconscious, often erupting in dreams, fantasies, or overwhelming urges that seem to come from nowhere. Think about what happens when you try not to think about something. The famous "don't think about a pink elephant" experiment demonstrates how focusing on avoiding a thought makes it more present in our minds. Similarly, the more energy we invest in rejecting our sexual desires, the more these desires demand our attention. This explains the seemingly paradoxical intensity of sexual feelings in deeply spiritual people. Often, they've devoted the most energy to pushing these feelings away. Jung observed that our psychological energy follows attention. When we concentrate on avoiding or suppressing certain thoughts or feelings, we're actually feeding them with our attention. This creates a psychological pressure cooker where denied desires build in intensity until they find expression, sometimes in distorted ways that cause suffering rather than joy. The journey of individuation offers a different approach. Instead of fighting against our sexual nature, we learn to listen to it with curiosity and compassion. What is this energy trying to tell us? What neglected aspects of ourselves might it be pointing toward? Often, intense sexual desires contain wisdom about our deeper needs for connection, creativity, or embodied experience. needs that our spiritual practice might be overlooking. This doesn't mean abandoning spiritual values or ethical boundaries. Rather, it means expanding our spiritual understanding to include our full humanity. Jung believed that true spirituality embraces the whole person, shadow and light, desire and devotion, body and spirit. When we compartmentalize ourselves, treating sexuality as separate from spirituality, we create the very inner conflicts that cause suffering. The shadow work involved in individuation isn't always comfortable. It requires courage to acknowledge desires we've been taught to see as inappropriate or problematic. Yet Jung found that this honest self-confrontation leads not to moral decline, but to greater psychological integrity. When we stop wasting energy on denial and repression, we can channel our life force more consciously and creatively. Many spiritual traditions hint at this truth in their more esoteric teachings. Tantric approaches in both Hinduism and Buddhism recognize sexual energy as a powerful force for spiritual transformation when approached with awareness. Mystical traditions across cultures often use erotic imagery to describe the soul's relationship with the divine. These approaches don't glorify sexuality for its own sake, but recognize it as an authentic expression of the same life force that drives spiritual seeking. Jung's psychological insight helps explain these traditional wisdom approaches. He understood that the psyche naturally seeks wholeness, integration of all its aspects rather than fragmentation. The tension we experience between spiritual aspirations and sexual desires isn't a sign that one must triumph over the other, but an invitation to discover a more comprehensive understanding that embraces both. As we progress on the path of individuation, we begin to recognize that our most challenging desires often contain the key to our next stage of growth. The shadow aspects we've rejected, including sexual energies, contain vital life force that, when reclaimed consciously, can fuel our continued evolution. This integration doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of bringing more and more of our unconscious material into conscious awareness. The reward for this courageous inner work is a more authentic relationship with both our sexuality and our spirituality. Instead of these forces competing within us, they become complementary aspects of our whole being. The energy previously wasted on internal conflict becomes available for creative expression and deeper connection with ourselves and others. If you feel ready to dive deeper into your own mind and balance both your light and shadow, explore the Sim Method ebook. It's a practical guide that helps you awaken your inner strength in just 5 minutes a day. The link is waiting for you in the first pinned comment. Among Jung's most fascinating discoveries was how our inner masculine and feminine energies shape our spiritual and sexual experiences. These aren't just abstract concepts, they're living forces within us that directly influence how we experience desire and connection. The anima represents the feminine aspect within men, while the animus represents the masculine aspect within women. Jung noticed that these inner energies often drive our attractions, fantasies, and even our spiritual longings in ways we rarely recognize consciously. When a man feels inexplicably drawn to a particular woman, Jung might suggest he's encountering his own anima projected outward. Similarly, a woman's attraction might reveal aspects of her animus seeking expression. What makes this especially relevant to our discussion is how these inner energies amplify sexual desire in spiritually oriented people. As we develop spiritually, we naturally become more aware of our inner depths, including these contrasexual aspects of ourselves that Jung identified. The more we open to spiritual energies, the more we activate these inner masculine and feminine forces that seek relationship and union. Think about your own experience. Have you ever felt an attraction so powerful it seemed almost mystical, or encountered someone who seemed to embody qualities you deeply admire, yet struggle to express yourself? These moments often signal the anima or animus at work, reaching toward completion through relationship with others. Spiritual development heightens our sensitivity to these inner energies. As we meditate, pray, or engage in other spiritual practices, we naturally become more attuned to the subtle movements within our psyche. The anima or animus, previously operating mainly through unconscious projections, begins to communicate more directly with our conscious mind, often through intensified desires, dreams with powerful sexual imagery, or attractions that feel spiritually significant. This explains something many spiritual seekers experience, but few discuss openly: the way spiritual awakening often coincides with sexual awakening or confusion. As our inner masculine and feminine energies become more active and conscious, they seek expression and integration. This inner stirring can manifest as intensified sexual desire that seems at odds with spiritual ideals. Yet from Jung's perspective, it's part of the same developmental process. For men, developing a healthy relationship with the anima means acknowledging and integrating feminine qualities like emotional sensitivity, intuition, and receptivity. When these qualities remain unconscious, they often emerge as projections onto women who then become objects of fascination, desire, or even obsession. The spiritual man who hasn't consciously integrated his anima may find himself overwhelmed by desires that seem to come from nowhere, yet actually emerge from neglected aspects of his own psyche seeking recognition. For women, the animus represents qualities traditionally associated with masculinity: logic, assertiveness, philosophical thinking, and spiritual authority. When unintegrated, these qualities can manifest as being drawn to powerful, sometimes unavailable men, or experiencing intense attraction to spiritual teachers or authority figures. The underlying psychological process involves recognizing and developing these qualities within oneself, rather than seeking them exclusively through others. Jung observed that spiritual development naturally accelerates this inner masculine-feminine dialogue. As we open to deeper levels of consciousness, we inevitably encounter these archetypal energies, seeking expression and integration. The sexual desires that emerge during spiritual practice often represent the anima or animus, communicating through the language of desire, attempting to guide us toward greater wholeness. This perspective offers a compassionate understanding of why spiritual people often experience such powerful sexual impulses. Rather than seeing these feelings as distractions or failures, we can recognize them as meaningful communications from our deeper self, inviting us toward greater inner balance and completion. Integration of these energies doesn't mean eliminating sexual desire, but transforming its expression. As we consciously recognize and develop the masculine and feminine aspects within ourselves, our projections gradually withdraw. We begin to relate to others from a place of greater wholeness rather than unconscious need. Sexual attraction remains, but its compulsive quality diminishes as we no longer depend on others to embody parts of ourselves we've disowned. This internal marriage of masculine and feminine energies, what Jung called the conjunctio, represents a crucial stage in spiritual development. Many ancient spiritual traditions symbolize this process through images of divine couples or sacred marriage. These weren't just poetic metaphors, but psychological truths about the integration necessary for spiritual maturation. By understanding the role of anima and animus in our experience, we gain valuable insight into the relationship between spirituality and sexuality. The intense desires that emerge during spiritual practice aren't random distractions, but meaningful encounters with aspects of ourselves seeking conscious integration. When approached with awareness, these energies can be transformed from sources of confusion or shame into powerful allies in our journey toward wholeness. Jung discovered something remarkable about the human mind. Beneath our personal experiences lies a shared symbolic language that speaks through dreams, art, myths, and yes, sexual desires. This collective unconscious contains universal patterns Jung called archetypes, and they profoundly influence both our spiritual yearnings and sexual attractions. When we experience overwhelming sexual desire alongside spiritual awakening, we're often encountering these archetypal energies rising from the depths of the psyche. These aren't random biological urges, but meaningful symbolic communications encoded in the language of desire. Jung found that spiritual people often experience these archetypal energies more intensely, precisely because their spiritual practices have opened channels to deeper levels of consciousness. Consider how often powerful spiritual experiences involve symbolic imagery, light breaking through darkness, descent into depths followed by ascension, death and rebirth, sacred marriage. These same symbolic patterns frequently appear in sexual fantasies and dreams, especially during periods of spiritual growth. This isn't coincidence, but evidence of the same archetypal energies expressing themselves through different channels of human experience. The serpent provides a perfect example of this archetypal connection. Across cultures, the serpent appears as a symbol of both spiritual wisdom and sexual energy. From the Kundalini serpent rising through chakras in yogic traditions to the serpent in Eden offering forbidden knowledge. Jung recognized that these weren't separate symbols, but different expressions of the same archetypal energy. The transformative power that can manifest as either sexual vitality or spiritual insight. Similarly, the chalice or cup appears throughout spiritual traditions as a symbol of receptivity to divine grace, and simultaneously functions as an ancient symbol of feminine sexuality. The sword or spear represents spiritual discernment and masculine sexual energy. These overlapping symbolic meanings aren't accidental, but reveal the fundamental connection between spiritual and sexual energies that Jung emphasized. When spiritual seekers experience intense sexual feelings, they're often encountering these archetypal energies in their raw, unprocessed form. The psyche naturally translates these powerful energies into sexual imagery because sexuality provides our most immediate experience of creative power, union of opposites, and transcendent connection, the same qualities we seek through spiritual practice. This explains why sexual energy often intensifies during spiritual retreats, meditation practice, or religious ceremonies. As we open to archetypal energies through spiritual practice, these same energies may simultaneously express themselves through sexual channels. From Jung's perspective, this isn't a problem to overcome, but a natural expression of psychic energy seeking multiple forms of manifestation. Understanding this archetypal dimension offers relief from the shame many spiritual seekers feel about their sexual desires. Rather than indicating spiritual failure, these feelings often signal successful contact with deeper levels of the psyche. The question becomes not how to eliminate these desires, but how to relate to them symbolically, recognizing the archetypal energies they express and finding conscious ways to honor and integrate these energies. Jung observed that many psychological problems stem from literal interpretation of symbolic content. When we take our sexual desires solely at face value, missing their symbolic dimensions, we may either act them out unconsciously or repress them as threatening. Neither approach allows for the transformative potential these energies contain. By recognizing the archetypal nature of our desires, we can relate to them with greater wisdom and creativity. This symbolic approach doesn't mean dismissing the physical reality of sexuality. Rather, it means recognizing that our sexual experiences carry multiple layers of meaning simultaneously: biological, personal, and archetypal. The most fulfilling sexual relationships honor all these dimensions, allowing physical connection to serve as a vessel for deeper archetypal energies. For spiritually inclined people who feel overwhelmed by sexual desires, Jung's perspective offers a middle path between repression and indulgence. By approaching these feelings with symbolic awareness, we can honor their energy without necessarily acting on every impulse. We might channel these archetypal forces into creative work, ritual practice, or conscious relationship, allowing their transformative power to find expression without becoming destructive. This symbolic understanding also helps explain why sexual desires often persist, despite our best efforts to transcend them. When we try to overcome these feelings through willpower alone, we're missing their archetypal significance. These energies aren't random obstacles, but meaningful communications from the collective unconscious, invitations to engage more deeply with fundamental life forces. The archetypal patterns Jung identified connect our personal experiences to the vast human story. When we feel torn between spiritual aspirations and sexual desires, we're experiencing in our individual lives the same tension explored in countless myths, religious texts, and artistic works throughout human history. Recognizing this connection can be profoundly reassuring. We're not alone in this struggle, but participating in an archetypal human journey toward integration of these complementary energies. By learning to recognize and work with these archetypal patterns, spiritually inclined people can develop a more harmonious relationship with their sexual nature. Rather than experiencing desire as a distraction from spiritual practice, they can recognize it as another manifestation of the same archetypal energies they encounter through prayer, meditation, or religious devotion. At the heart of Jung's psychology lies his concept of the self, not the everyday ego we typically identify with, but something far more expansive. The self represents our complete psychological wholeness, the total integration of conscious and unconscious aspects of our being. This concept transforms how we understand the relationship between spirituality and sexuality in profound ways. Unlike the ego, which often tries to identify with spiritual ideals while rejecting sexual impulses, the self naturally seeks to embrace all aspects of our nature. Jung discovered that the self appears in dreams and visions as a unifying center, often represented by circular or quaternary symbols like mandalas. These symbols frequently combine seemingly opposite elements, suggesting that psychological wholeness requires integration of apparent contradictions, including the spiritual and the sexual. When we experience intense sexual desires alongside spiritual development, we're often witnessing the self's attempt to bring neglected aspects of our nature into consciousness. The self doesn't recognize the artificial divisions we create between higher spiritual functions and lower bodily impulses. Instead, it continuously works toward wholeness by bringing forward whatever aspects of ourselves we've neglected or denied. This explains a pattern Jung observed repeatedly. The more one-sided our conscious attitude becomes, the more forcefully the opposite tendency emerges from the unconscious. The spiritual seeker who identifies exclusively with transcendent values may find themselves ambushed by powerful sexual desires. These aren't distractions from the spiritual path, but communications from the self, pointing toward aspects of experience that need integration. Consider your own experience. Have you noticed that the harder you try to be purely spiritual, the more insistent certain desires become? This psychological principle helps explain why spiritual communities often struggle with sexual scandals, or why individual seekers feel torn between their aspirations and their desires. The self continually pushes toward wholeness, even when our conscious minds resist this movement. Jung's concept of the transcendent function offers a way through this dilemma. This psychological process emerges when we hold the tension between opposing aspects of ourselves, like spiritual aspiration and sexual desire, without collapsing to either side. Rather than choosing between these polarities or trying to eliminate one, we learn to maintain awareness of both simultaneously. From this tension, a third position gradually emerges, a more comprehensive viewpoint that transcends and includes the original opposites. This isn't just abstract theory, but practical wisdom for anyone navigating the relationship between sexuality and spirituality. Instead of fighting against sexual feelings or surrendering to them unconsciously, we can approach them as meaningful expressions of life energy seeking integration. By maintaining conscious awareness of both our spiritual aspirations and our sexual nature, we create space for the transcendent function to emerge, a more comprehensive understanding that honors both dimensions of experience. The path toward this integration isn't always comfortable. It requires what Jung called bearing the tension of opposites, staying present with seemingly contradictory aspects of ourselves without premature resolution. This psychological work demands courage, honesty, and compassion toward the full spectrum of our humanity. Many spiritual traditions contain hidden wisdom about this integration process. The alchemical marriage, the union of Shiva and Shakti and Tantra, the bridal mysticism of various religious traditions, all point toward the psychological truth Jung articulated, that wholeness comes through integration of opposites rather than triumph of one side over the other. This perspective explains why spiritual development often intensifies rather than diminishes sexual energy. As we open to deeper levels of the psyche through spiritual practice, we naturally encounter more of our total being, including powerful instinctual energies previously kept from consciousness. The self orchestrates this encounter, not to distract us from spiritual development, but to ensure that our spirituality encompasses our complete humanity rather than floating above it in dissociated idealism. Jung observed that genuine spiritual development doesn't mean transcending our humanity, but embodying it more fully. The goal isn't to escape our human nature, but to transform our relationship with it through expanded consciousness. Sexual energy, when approached with awareness, becomes not an obstacle to spiritual development, but a vital aspect of our wholeness that deserves understanding and respect. This integration process helps explain the extraordinary creativity often found in people who have successfully navigated this territory. When the energy previously consumed by inner conflict between spiritual and sexual impulses is liberated through integration, it becomes available for creative expression. Many of history's great artists, writers, and even spiritual teachers demonstrate this creative power that emerges when these complementary energies work in harmony rather than opposition. The path toward integration isn't about finding perfect balance once and for all, but engaging in an ongoing dialogue between different aspects of ourselves. The relationship between our spiritual and sexual natures continues to evolve throughout life, requiring renewed attention at different developmental stages. What serves integration at one phase of life may need reconsideration at another, as the self continues its movement toward ever greater wholeness. This dynamic understanding offers comfort to those who find themselves repeatedly struggling with the same issues around sexuality and spirituality. These recurring challenges don't necessarily indicate failure, but may reflect the spiral nature of psychological development, where we revisit similar themes at progressively deeper levels of awareness. For spiritual people experiencing intense sexual feelings, Jung's concept of the self offers a compassionate framework for understanding these experiences. Rather than judging themselves for having these desires, they can recognize them as communications from the self, invitations to expand their conscious understanding to include aspects of their nature previously relegated to the unconscious. This shift from judgment to curious engagement transforms the inner relationship with desire, reducing shame while increasing self-knowledge. The ultimate goal in Jung's psychology isn't to eliminate tension between opposing aspects of ourselves, but to transform our relationship with this tension. When approached with consciousness, the dynamic interplay between spiritual and sexual energies becomes a source of vitality and creativity rather than conflict. This is the gift of integration, not static perfection, but dynamic wholeness that honors all dimensions of our humanity. Jung found profound wisdom in alchemy, not as literal chemistry, but as symbolic psychology. He saw that alchemical processes perfectly mirrored the inner transformations he witnessed in his patients, particularly regarding sexual energy. In alchemical terms, sexual energy represents the prima materia, raw, unprocessed material containing tremendous potential. Just as alchemists didn't reject their base materials but transformed them, Jung suggests approaching sexual energy not as something to overcome, but as essential fuel for psychological growth. The alchemical stages, calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, fermentation, distillation, and coagulation, map perfectly onto psychological work with sexual energy. Calcination means honestly facing our desires, breaking down denial through conscious attention. Dissolution involves allowing emotional responses to flow freely without judgment. Separation develops discernment about different aspects of desire, distinguishing physical attraction from emotional longing, creative impulse, or spiritual connection. Conjunction represents reuniting these separated elements in a new, conscious relationship, perhaps integrating spiritual awareness into sexual experience, or allowing sexual vitality to enliven spiritual practice. During fermentation, this integrated energy begins transforming autonomously, often producing unexpected spiritual insights or creative breakthroughs. Distillation refines this energy through reflection and meditation, gradually transforming raw desire into subtle awareness without losing its essential power. Finally, coagulation embodies this transformed energy in daily life, expressing it through conscious relationships, creative work, or dedicated service. This framework explains why spiritual people often experience intense sexual feelings. Rather than distractions, these represent vital energy awaiting transformation through conscious engagement. The process rarely proceeds linearly. We cycle through these operations repeatedly as new unconscious material emerges, explaining why even those with substantial inner work periodically encounter powerful desires. Many spiritual traditions contain veiled references to this alchemical work. Tantric practices, Christian mystical spiritual marriage, Taoist internal alchemy. Jung recognized these as different cultural expressions of the same psychological truth. Sexual energy contains tremendous transformative potential when approached with awareness. The practical application involves maintaining witnessing consciousness throughout experiences of desire, neither identifying completely with desire nor rejecting it, but observing it with curiosity to discover its deeper wisdom. This creates space for transformation that neither suppression nor indulgence can provide. For spiritual seekers experiencing intense desires, this alchemical perspective offers a middle path. These feelings aren't threats to spiritual development nor reasons to abandon spiritual values. They are meaningful communications containing precious potential for transformation when engaged consciously. The very energy that, properly transformed, fuels the highest spiritual realizations. If you've ever felt torn between your spiritual path and the intensity of your desires, know that you're not alone in this journey. Jung's insights offer not just understanding, but a practical roadmap for transforming this inner conflict into your greatest source of power and wholeness. This integration doesn't happen overnight, but each step brings more peace, authenticity, and deeper connection with yourself and others. If these ideas resonated with you, if you recognized your own struggles and possibilities in what we've explored today, consider joining our community by subscribing to this channel. Together, we'll continue exploring the hidden wisdom that helps us embrace our full humanity while deepening our spiritual journey. After all, the most profound transformation happens when we bring light to the aspects of ourselves we've been taught to keep in darkness.